everyone. Welcome back to the Healing Words podcast. Amy Collier suffered with depression, PTSD, dissociation, self harm, and multiple suicide attempts due to a wide range of abuses that spanned decades. She joins us today to discuss her memoir, Beyond the Scars, which, among other things, details the mental effects of abuse as well as her struggle with faith. Thank you for joining me, Amy.
Thank you for having me.
So I have your book here. Beyond the Scars is the title, but the subtitle is How I Learned God Didn't Abandon Me in My Darkest Hour. And that word hour really should be plural because you've had several dark hours in your life. Could you give us a summary, please?
Um, my mother was an abusive mother, so it started as a child, the more emotional and some physical, and then as a 12, 13-year-old, I was molested by my best friend's dad. Um, I was date raped at 16. I married into a domestic violence marriage for 9 years. And I was also robbed and beaten in a Walmart parking lot.
And that
So,
nearly cost you your life. We'll talk about that
yes,
a little bit later. Okay, so the book opens with a suicide attempt. You are up in the middle of the night. You are taking pains to make sure that your sons don't hear you. But you were really, really going through. Could you tell us what was going on with you then?
I truly wanted the pain to stop. And I did not know any other way to make it stop. I was emotionally just exhausted. I could not deal with the traumas and what was going on at that time. I was convinced 100% that my children would be better off without me because I had suffered with severe depression for 26 years and they saw me crying all the time and I just felt that they deserved better.
How old were you at this point when the story opens?
Um 36, which
And
and
your
that was my last suicide attempt.
okay, and your sons at the time were,
10 and 16.
and the 16-year-old realized something was going on and came and started knocking on the door. Okay, I want to talk about a few things. You've talked about the kind of abuses and trauma you've gone through. Do you have a memory when you thought, I'm the problem? Do you
I
do you remember the
always
first time you thought I'm the problem? And did an event set that off, or was it a truth that gradually came on?
I had always felt that I was the problem because I've always felt unloved and unwanted from a child. And I've I feel like it was embedded in me from my mother. But I always felt that everything was my fault. I took on the weight of the world. Everything I caused it. It was my fault. My mother don't love me, so why should anybody else love me? Why should anybody treat me? God didn't love me, so why should anybody be kind to me or not hurt me? I expected them to hurt me.
Right, right. Siblings, do you have siblings?
Yes, I have three.
And are you the oldest? Where are you in that
Now
line?
I have a older brother and then an older sister, and then it's me and then my little sister.
And did they feel the same way that you feel, that they experienced what you experienced?
My brother left the home and the state
Mhm.
when he was 17, and I was, what, probably 13. Um, I saw him this year for the first time in 27 years.
Wow.
My oldest sister, she moved out as soon as she graduated from high school and left the state. So it was more me and my little sister, and she had the same adulthood, same childhood. I mean, we a lot of our traumas are parallel.
Okay. Let's talk about things that you thought were normal as a child, and then later you realize this is not normal at all.
I'm not real sure. I don't know if I ever even thought that. I just knew this was the way things were. I
Okay.
don't think I ever thought that um, it was different
Hmm.
or not different. I
Right.
just knew this was the way things were for me. I never talked about anything to my friends or anybody, so I don't know what, you know,
What they were going through.
I didn't, yeah, I don't know. I never could compare because I never talked about anything. I
Mhm.
didn't ask questions and I didn't give any information.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about an event that happened. I think you were 13 years old. Your best friend was a male, and due to a babysitting situation, I believe it was, you were spending the night at their home. Can you walk us through that?
I was asked to spend the night so that I could babysit one of the kids that morning, the next morning, and I was woke up early in the morning by the mom, and she told me that the dad wasn't feeling well, so he decided not to go to work. So that whenever I woke up, just to go on and go home, that I wasn't going to be needed. And I said, okay, and then went back to sleep. And then I woke up to him in the bed with me, touching me.
Okay.
And then the baby started crying after some time, and he jumped up and run to get the baby before it woke up my friend. And as soon as he left the room, I run into where my friend was at and tried to wake him up. But I
Okay.
never told him.
Right. But you had a sense that he might have known.
After that night, I felt like he tried hard not to let me be left in the room alone with his dad. We never talked about it. I never said nothing, and he never said nothing, but it felt like he was putting forth more of an effort to make sure I wasn't left alone.
Later
Because
on,
this
you did,
went on for probably, it went on for months.
then later on, you did find out that this was not his first time trying this.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you had an attempted suicide. Tell us about your first attempt as a child, because what you told us, what opens in the book is your last one, period.
Hmm.
Tell us about your first one as a child.
My first one, I was probably around 13 years old, and I took um, an ungodly amount of different prescription drugs, and I went to sleep. I didn't leave a note. I never told anybody. And I went to sleep, and I woke up the next day, and I was so angry at God that I woke up. And I was yelling at him, but I was so sick. I was on the couch for 2 weeks, throwing up, could not move for 2 weeks straight, but I never told anyone what I had done. And so my mom just thought, well, I just had a flu or something. I was just sick.
Okay. And at some point, the decision was made to get you some mental health hospitalization. Um, that to me is the trip when your parents enrolled you there, took you there, was just the saddest thing in this book. Could you describe that for us?
Which it started, I had told, um, I finally broke down and told my best friend that I didn't want to live anymore. And she went and told the guidance counselor at school. And the next thing I know, I'm in the guidance counselor's office. And she asked me if I said it. And I said yes. And I meant it with everything in me. And within no time, that my parents were immediately called and I was put on a list to be hospitalized. My dad was extremely angry that he had to pay to put me in the hospital. And the trip up there, he said a lot of hurtful things. He never come and saw me. He didn't talk to me on the phone. I got a lovely letter from my grandmother telling me that I was doing it for attention and look at the money I was costing him, and I just had Satan in me, and I never talked to her again. I never heard from her again. And it was rough because I'd already didn't want to be there. And then I felt like that everything again was my fault, that I hurt my family. Um, if God would have just let me die the first time, we wouldn't even be in this situation. So I'm even more angry at him because now here I go, I'm being placed 4 hours away into a hospital, scared, didn't know what to do, and my family's mad at me and nobody's talking to me, and I just felt kind of abandoned.
Right. And the whole time you were there, you were determined that you were just going to say what the doctor needed to hear so that you would go
Oh yeah.
home and complete this.
Yep. Yeah, because they had told me in the beginning that if I just went voluntarily, I would only be there maybe 2 weeks. And then once I got there, they told me I would be there a minimum of 6 weeks. I ended up being there for 7, but I lied. When I got there, there are recurring children that have been in there in and out and in and out and in and out for suicide attempts, and the same thing I was in there for. So when you go in, the girls, they tell you how to get out. They
Ah,
tell you, they told me this is what you say, this is what you don't say, and you'll get to go home. And so, I mean, they've been in and out so many times, they knew the system. And because I wanted to go home so bad that I told them what they wanted to hear, and then I would cry and cry and cry all night long when the nurses and nobody could see me.
okay. All right. Again, you're a child here. You become an adult. That is not your last attempt.
No.
I am wondering, with this kind of emotional pain, what kind of connections were you making? What did your friendships look like? The first marriage that you had.
Well, my first husband, we started dating when I turned 14.
Hmm.
And I was with him from the time I was 14 until I was 25.
Hmm.
He was a lot like my mom. And when I got out of the hospital, I'm 14 years old, I moved in with him and his family. And I
Okay.
lived with them. And, then I was pregnant at 17, and it just, he, I had acquaintances and I had friends. I just didn't talk to them. I didn't see them. When I went into the hospital, when I came out, I isolated myself.
Hmm.
I only had my boyfriend at the time, who I ended up marrying, but he was abusive, just like my mom. So it was what I knew, what I was familiar with, what I was used to.
Yeah, I think I've read someplace that if you've got childhood trauma, your connections, or especially your primary connection, is going to be like some kind of psychic way for you to try to heal that wound from your childhood. So it's not, it's not unlikely. It's not a surprise that you married your mother.
Mhm.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about, you mentioned anger at God. Was your family, were they Christians? Did you all go to church?
No, at that time, none of them went to church, but where
Mhm,
we lived, there were two separate preachers
mhm.
that were neighbors. And when I was young, little younger before all this started, that's where the anger come in. Um, I would walk through the woods and knock on the door at one of their houses, and one of them would take me to church with them
Okay.
and their family. And if they couldn't, I'd go to the other one's house, and one of them would usually take me, and I would go to church. I went to church Sunday mornings. I went to church Sunday nights. I went to church Wednesday night because I grasped onto the thought of someone that loved me. And they would tell me how much God loved me, and I wanted that so bad. I just wanted someone to love me. And I mean, I held on to that with all I had. I was not going to miss church because God loved me. And then when the molestation started, I got so angry because I was confused. It was, I've been told my whole life that God loved his children, and I was a child. And how could you let someone else hurt me when I'm a kid? I'm a child. So then it went into, well, my mom doesn't love me. God doesn't love me. So why, I've done something wrong. I've caused this. I don't know what it was. I don't know what I did, but I had to have done something to make God turn his back on me, to make everyone that comes into contact with me at some point in time hurt me. And so I stopped going to church, and I never stopped praying. I have prayed every day my entire life, but they have been angry prayers. They have been screaming. They have been cussing. They have been just so not what you would want nobody to know you were saying. Until, my healing process, when God showed me that he had been there. But up until that point, that's where the anger started, because I felt like I'm a child and you're letting these things happen to me.
I want to back up to something you just said, that people around you always hurt you. And it's one thing to be hurt by people that you know, but you had a very, very frightening, almost life-ending situation where you were hurt and people around were just, they were watching and didn't say anything. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, I was in my 30s, and at the time I worked at Walmart in town, and I worked night shift. I worked from 2 p.m. to 11 p.m. And this night I got off work and I went and got some groceries. I had bags on my arms. And when I come out to my car, as I was putting the key in my car to unlock the door, I heard a gentleman beside me. He said, "Miss." And as I turned to look at him, I immediately knew what was going to happen, but before I could even think, he started punching me in my face and trying to grab my pocketbook, which was around my shoulder, and I had groceries around my arm. But in the struggle, the bags ripped and everything, but my pocketbook had twisted under my arm. So he's pulling and hitting me, and by now I'm on the ground, and his truck was right behind my car, and the passenger's door was open, and he's dragging me by my pocketbook, getting into the car. And as he's getting into the car, the driver started pulling off, and then luckily the strap on my pocketbook broke, and they kept going.
And as this is happening, a coworker is
Well, I
watching.
didn't know that at the time. When I picked up what had fell out of my pocketbook, which my cell phone had fallen out. So I called 911 right then and there, and I'm describing, the truck as kind of as it's what direction it was going in. As I went back into Walmart, there was a coworker standing at the door, and then he turned his head because by now they had to call the ambulance, and I ended up going to the hospital because my face was beaten so bad. And the next day, when we watched the video footage from the parking lot, it showed like 7 cars had pulled into spots right in that area and the people getting out of their car and walking into the store, and no one said a word, no one called 911.
Mm. I can only imagine how that must have added to those feelings that you had of worthiness, worthlessness, and people just hurting you. However, and this is a big however, there's a quote from your book. You say, God had ways of reminding me of his presence. And there are three people that God sent to you to let you know that you were not alone and that he was there. Could you tell us about those?
Yes, and it all happened right after the last suicide attempt. I
Mm-hmm.
had cut that night. When I had cut myself, I had went to the hospital. I was released from the hospital about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I went right into work 8:30 in the morning, and I cleaned houses. I cleaned for a client named Sam, and I always wore long sleeves anyway because I had a history of cutting.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, but my arm was bandaged up, and I had a long sleeve shirt on, and I was in there cleaning. And just out of the blue, she comes into the kitchen and asks if I could come into the living room. And I'm not sure. And I get down, I go into the living room, and her husband is sitting there. And she asked me to sit down. And she said, "Can I pray for you?" Just out of the complete blue. And she had no idea what I had done. Nobody had knew what I had done, hours before that. And in my mind, it's like, sure, you can pray for me. God don't care. God don't. If you can pray all you want to, He's not going to listen because it's me. And I said, okay. And she prayed and gave me a bookmark with the scripture on it. And it said, I can do all things through Christ that strengthen me. And then the very next day, I clean condos. So I go into a condo, and there was a lady out on the balcony I've never seen before, never met, never seen since. And when I went into the condo, she hollered to if I could get her a bottle of water in her cane. I said, sure. So I grab it and I go out to the balcony to hand it to her, and she just gasped. And she's like, they're so beautiful. And I'm like, oh, here we go. It's like, okay. So I hand her a bottle of water in her cane, and she said, you've got angels all around you. And I'm trying to talk to myself, like, don't you dare cry. Don't you cry. And I'm like, oh, thank you, or whatever. And she's like, can you sit with me? And it's like, well, we're on a time schedule with condos. You've got to get the rooms clean. I said, well, I've really got to clean the room. And she said, well, I'll tell them you cleaned it. Just sit with me. And then she proceeded to tell me that she was there on a class reunion, did not want to come. She was in bad health, lived far away. Her daughter and son-in-law brought her. And she said, as soon as I saw you, I'm not here for the reunion. God wants you to know that you're not alone. He sent me here to tell you this. And the whole time it's like, don't you cry. Don't you do it. And it's like, okay, because I had just prayed and well yelled at God about why are you letting why won't you help me? Where are you? Why won't you stop this pain? Why are you punishing me? And then when she said that, it's like kind of like, okay, I know that's God answering what I just hollered at him,
Right.
hours, a couple hours before. And then she said, I want to give you something. And she gave me um, a bookmark with the same
Scripture.
scripture. So when I did finally leave the condo, we talked for a while. When I left the condo and I got back in the elevator, it's like, okay, I hear you. But you still ain't answering my question. But it started like I know he's trying to get to me now because this is I had just tried to commit suicide and then I just immediately within a you know less than 48 hours had two people out of the blue start talking to me about God and it's like okay I'm ready to listen because I do feel like he had been trying to talk to me, but because I was so angry, I
Mm.
couldn't hear him. And
Right.
I, even if when I knew that something was coming from him, I refused to believe it because I
Wow.
let my anger win.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something to be said about the angry prayers. Um, they're still prayers.
Yeah,
God knows who he is.
he can handle it. That's for
He can
sure.
handle it. He can
After
handle it.
what 26 years of me screaming and cussing at him, and he's still sending angels to me. So
Still.
he can handle it.
Let's back up and talk about your mother. Your relationship didn't improve. At some point, she divorced your dad, remarried, became a widow, and then her health failed. All along, your relationship was not good. You had to make a decision when her health became really, really bad. She was in some kind of assisted living, and you know she could not no longer stay there. Talk to us about this decision that you had to make, the choice before you, the decision you made, and then what happened after that.
Now, we'll go back a little bit. When I was 14 years old, my mom walked out and left us. She
Mm,
left. She didn't have anything to do with us. I tried briefly living with her um, for 2 months or a month when I was 16, and that ended horribly, horribly. Um, I saw my mom maybe once, twice a year. She would call when she needed something. That was it. She didn't want us, me and my little sister, my other siblings. She didn't want to be involved. My children knew my mother as my mom, not their grandmom. And one day I was going to take her. She had no clothes and it was getting cold and it was her birthday and I was going to take her to buy her clothes. And she called me the night before and told me that she wasn't going, which I never expected her to go because that was our normal routine. And then a couple days later, she called me and said, it was like 3 days later, and she called me and said she just woke up. She had been asleep since she had talked to me 3 days ago. And she thinks she passed out on the floor. So I told her, I was like, I'm coming to get you. We're going to urgent care. And she fought me and fought me. She won't go in. She just needed stuff from the store and she just wanted me to go to the store. And I showed up at her house and I took her to urgent care. And from there, they took her by ambulance to the hospital. Um, she had had a heart attack during that time she was asleep, a massive heart attack, and 40% of her heart was dead. Um, they did 6 bypasses and a valve repair. She was in that hospital for 32 days, transported to another hospital where she was at for another 30 days, and then transported to rehab. I never left. I was there every day. I was there all day, all night. I would leave to go to work back at the hospital. I would have to call the hospital in the morning to even determine if I could go to work. My siblings at the time, my mom didn't have a relationship with any of us. She had no one. So it was me and her most of the time by herself. And then while she was in rehab, they told me that um, she was no longer a candidate to be in rehab, that they needed to bring in hospice. Um, and that either A, I put her in a nursing home or I bring her to my home. And so I had to talk with my mom, and she wanted to come to my home because she didn't want to die in a nursing home. And I knew if the other shoe was on the other foot, she would never have done that for me. She never wanted me, but I was found and determined that I wasn't going to be like my mom. And I tried so hard my whole life not to be my mom. So I brought her home and she lived with me for 4 months before she passed. And it was the hardest 4 months of my life. She made things 100 times harder than it needed to be. She screamed, she cussed, she threw stuff, she would do things in the middle of the night. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But and many times I called hospice and said, I cannot do this. And I had a talk with my mom one time and I told her, I said, you got to go to a nursing home. I can't do this anymore. And she said that, well, and I told her, I said, I know for a fact you'd not do this for me. You would never take care of me if I was sick. And I'm trying to take care of you. And my son at the time lived at home. And I said, he has no memories of you other than this right here. And this is, you're going to die. And this is all he's going to remember. And she passed 2 weeks later, but I mean, I stuck it out. I stuck it out. But it was hard. It was hard.
Let's talk about the moment of her passing because that is a remarkable telling in this book. Tell us what happened there.
The night that she passed away, I was sitting in the floor with a baby chick hatching. And um, I had just turned to the door and I turned back to my mom and I said, Mom, Charlie's here, which was her husband that had passed 5 years previous. And then about 5 minutes later, my mom started the process of passing.
Yes. Okay. Um, let's talk about your healing journey. Was there therapy? What worked for you?
Now, when I was younger, I probably spent about 10 years in and out of therapy, not
Mhm.
consistently. But when I was in my 30s, I went back into therapy. And it was just my whole life, I was told we don't talk about things. You just don't talk about things. So when I would go to therapy, I mean, I would be covered in sweat before we even started talking. My heart would race. I did not want to talk about this stuff. And then one day, my therapist, he said, you know what? He said, we got to stop doing this. He said, you're getting worse every time we try to, you start talking about that. He said, let's just try something different. He said, let's go to Barnes and Noble, go to any bookstore and just find some books that jump out at you on in the self-help section and just find encouraging material to read and something that can um, try to give you hope. And so I kept a notebook in my car And when I would read a book, if something jumped out at me that just grabbed me, I would write it down. Just write that sentence down. I would, if I saw quotes that meant something to me, I would write it down. And I kept it with me everywhere I go, because once the recordings would start that, you're worthless. You've caused this. Everybody hates you. Look at how you raise your kids. You look what kind of mother you are. I would pull out that notebook and I would just read out loud and just keep reading what I'd wrote out loud. And then the voice would get quieter and quieter. And then the longer I did it, the voice would stop quicker and quicker. And I had to learn how to reprogram how I reacted and how I responded, and just constant positive stuff in my mind. YouTube videos, motivational videos, anything that could just kind of take my mind onto a positive track and
Mhm.
not focusing on what was hurting.
Right, right. I remember when I was going through something, YouTube prayers, certain YouTube prayer channels, I would just have them on a loop
Yep.
while I was sleeping. And it is the voice that counters the other voice.
Yeah.
Right. And to the point that what I was listening to outside of my head, that became normal. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? As opposed
Yeah.
to you know what I'm saying, as opposed to the inner voice that I was hearing. Yeah. So I
That is the
absolutely get that.
only thing in this world that we have control over, is how we respond and what we allow in our mind, because triggers are going to happen all the time. And
Yes.
that is the only thing. You have to learn how to switch it over,
Hmm.
because when you focus on it, I could go from being completely normal to a sight, sound, anything, and I could be suicidal within 24 hours. That
Wow.
fast. It could drag me down so fast.
Hmm.
And so I really had to be very conscious and constant. Just, I got to keep reading this. I got to keep listening to this until I'm okay. And then I'm back to, I'm ready to hit the world again. I'm ready to go.
Right, right. I believe that's why the Bible tells you think on these things. Whatsoever things are true and good and lovely and noble and of a good report. You have to have the mind of Christ because that is, again, like you said, that's where the battle starts.
Yeah.
That's where
Satan
the battle
attacks you
starts.
when you're at your weakest.
Absolutely. How did the way your upbringing and some of the trauma that you've gone through, did it affect your parenting at all?
Oh yeah. I went from, because I was so worried that my kids would ever feel like I felt. I took it to a whole different extreme. I was so overprotective of anything anybody would say to them. I was so, I took it to a whole different extreme of
Right,
being way overprotective. Me and my husband would fight because I couldn't even deal with him disciplining them, even if they deserved it. And he wasn't really doing anything, but I was so afraid that they would feel like I felt growing up,
right.
that I just wanted to just protect them in a bubble. And I went to a whole different extreme. I wasn't good.
But you caught yourself and they turned out well.
Oh, yes, thank you, Jesus. They very, very good.
So what are you up to these days? Do you have another project that you're working on?
Well, I would like to write another book on the difficulties of being a caregiver at some point.
Mm,
But I also have a farm and I have a cleaning company.
yes.
And my cleaning company right now is taking every second of my time.
So
It
tell us
has,
about that. How old is your cleaning company?
well, let's see, we probably in our fourth year.
Okay.
Right now, I've hired 5 people to help me. And as of right now, we do about 180 properties a month, every
Wow.
month. So
Okay.
it's gotten crazy. Then we'll be hiring more in January so I can, step back a little bit. But yes, we do. I usually leave my house around 8:30 in the morning, and I usually get home anywhere from 11:45 to 1 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. Wow. Okay. All right. And where can we find you online?
Um, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all and my website, and it's all Amy K. Collier.
Okay. And I will put that in the liner notes. All right. So we're at the point of our discussion where I ask you the same 5 questions that I ask all of our guests. We are the Healing Words podcast. So I ask you one sentence that starts with the first letter of the word words. W. When did you know that you would write this book?
Didn't. I didn't want to write the book. God kept putting it on my heart. It took me 10 years.
Really? So you knew you got an impression that he wanted you to write the book, and your
And I
no was
fought it.
because,
I didn't want nobody to know.
oh, okay. Hmm. What made you give in?
He wouldn't let it go. I fought him. It just kept burning in me. And it took 10 years to write the book.
Wow. Okay. Oh, what were your obstacles aside from the shame? Sounds like you didn't want anyone else to know. Were you concerned that you could not do it? Did you doubt that you could write a book?
No, I, I never thought about the writing process that I couldn't do it or I could. I just, I buried that stuff so deep and I had such a thick wall that I hid behind that it hurts so bad to revisit those spots to put them on paper. So
Right,
I could write a paragraph and I would literally have to walk away from it for a month, so 6 months, or one time 2 years. I
right.
just could not think about having to sit back down and relive the moments again to put them to paper.
How did that change?
Just a little at a time. I do a paragraph at a time. And to be completely honest, normally when you write a book, when you're done, you start editing. I did not. I wrote it down the first time and I sent it off as is. I could not go back to edit the book.
Okay. R, rear view. Knowing what you know now, if you had to look back to young Amy when she was yelling at God and she was in all of this pain, what would you tell her?
God's going to use it for the good. He's got a purpose and a plan, and there's a reason that you've had to go through what you went through, and it's going to help other people not suffer as long as you did.
Right. And you've come to that realization now
Oh, yeah.
in the writing of the book, or did it come before then?
During the writing of the book, even though it was so hard, I just kept, I just could feel deep down that there was a reason for it, that I had to do it. There was a reason that I had to tell all.
Okay. D, delete. You're very vulnerable in this storytelling. Where there's parts of the story you were thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't put that in. Maybe that's too much. Maybe I shouldn't have said that.
At the time, no, because that's part of me. That's in order to know why I am the way I am, you had to know how I got here. So I did not delete anything in the writing. Um, Now, when the book was to be published, 2 weeks before it was to be released, I lost my mind. All of
Mm,
a sudden, I was working one night and just the terror filled my body. And I know that was Satan trying to get at me, but
mm,
all of a sudden, it's like, what have you done?
mm.
What have you done? Why you now everybody's going to know everything that they did to you. And I was married at a time to my husband, what, 25, 26 years, and there were things he did not know. And it's like, what have you done? This is not going to end well for you. This is going to be horrible, which my whole life experience, if you told you were punished. So it just, for 2 weeks from 2 weeks prior to the day of book release, I was crying and in a panic, and the triggers were going off left and right. I was calling my doctor, who is a dear friend of mine, and it's like I'm on the edge of the cliff. I'm about to fall off, you know. And then one night, it's like, Amy, God's got this. God's got this.
Mm.
There is a reason. Even the publishing process, everything that happened was only by the grace of God for me to even be traditionally published. I didn't have what they wanted. I mean, I had to hire a publishing attorney to go over the book. The publisher threatened to cancel my contract because of the domestic violence. So I had to provide court documents for every word said in the book, or they were going to drop my contract. I mean,
Wow.
it was just all the hurdles that I went through. I had to remind myself I didn't, God brought me through them hurdles because
Right.
I didn't. And it's like, there's a reason. He's got a purpose and a plan for it. You've got to trust it. Just calm down. But yeah,
You mentioned triggers. Do you have any lingering effects today still?
I still get triggers, a smell, something, a sound, something could happen. I still get triggers. The only difference is I've learned how to stop them
Okay.
quickly. I still get them, but I've learned how to stop them so that they don't have the same effect on me that they had all those years.
Okay. S, strengthened. How have you been strengthened by the writing of this book?
I think it was freeing that all the secrets that you've held for so long, you finally released them. You had to tear down that wall inside that you built up to get to even put all the things on the paper. And it frees you up because you were hiding behind so much that now it's like it's out there. It is what it is. It's
Right. Okay.
it has strengthened you. It empowers you a little bit that you're not hiding behind all the secrets anymore.
How do you feel about the fact that your daughter will never go through what you've gone through?
Oh, the whole generational cycle had
Hmm.
been broken with me, um, because my mom went through the same thing I went through. Her mom was the same, and I learned all that as my mom was dying, and I started questioning her childhood and how she felt about her mother. And then it's like, wait a minute, that's the way we feel about you. And then she would say how her mother felt about, and it's like you see the cycle. It's the cycle. My mom did love me. My mom didn't know how to show me that she loved me.
She
She
did.
didn't, and she didn't feel loved by her mom, but her mom loved her, but she didn't know how to show her. So to know that my kids never went through what I went through, and their kids now, my grandchildren, will never, that cycle's gone and broken. And that to me is just, I feel like that's the only biggest accomplishment of my life, to know that that cycle's gone. It's done.
You did the work, girl,
It ended.
and it
we
was work.
Yeah, Yes, it was.
I want to thank you so much, Amy, for dropping by and talking to us about your book and everything that went into the writing of your book. I'm going to put all of your social media information in our
Thank you.
liner notes. And I want to thank you again for dropping by. And I will see everyone again on the next edition of Healing Words Podcast. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye.